Like I know how to do that. Good evening, everyone. So that's our cue. It is 6:30 on the dot now. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming for our first in-person board training session in well over a year and a half. It is so great to see so many of you. Thank you for coming today. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping to start off with. The Lowry is requesting that we wear masks when not actively eating or drinking. I am going to ask those of us that are presenting tonight, we're going to try and stay here at the podium or at the very front of the room, just so that we can have our masks off, because otherwise we sound like the person in the drive-through, and it's really hard to understand us. So we're going to keep our masks off while we're talking up here so that you are able to have an enjoyable experience. So thank you so much for coming. We'll make sure that this works. Pardon me for just a second. There we go. So welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We're really excited to kick off our in-person board education sessions again, and that you're all a part of it. And I wanted to introduce myself and some of the key people that are here today that helped put this together. I am Jessica Tolles. I'm our Vice President of Community Management here, for those of you who have not met me yet. We also have with us tonight, we have two attorneys. We have Mueller Graff here. We have Tim Mueller and David Graff, who will be presenting on some of the legislative changes that are going into effect at the beginning of September that you need to be aware of. Then we also have Leslie Johnson, who is our Vice President of Operations. Thank you, Leslie. We also have Justin Heckmaster, who is our Marketing New Business Development. Most of you know Justin. We also have Len Kaiser, one of our regional directors here. He runs our Loveland operation for us. Macy Hall, who is our new lifestyle manager, who has made all of this. She's at the front desk, blonde hair. You saw her as you were coming in. She did all of the planning for today's event, so thank her on your way out. And then we do have a variety of community managers. If you're one of our managers, you could stand up and just wave so that the board members know who you are. We have plenty of managers here. Thank you all. And then certainly thank you to all of the board members who came today. Having continuing education, improving your knowledge of our industry and what we do, and staying current on the legislative issues that impact your associations is so important. And we really appreciate you committing to your community and your position as a board member and taking these steps to come today. So thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. We do have today, we have our session broken up into two parts. We're going to talk about budgeting. Get that out of the way. We're going to talk about budgeting and the process that we've gone through with training for our managers and the philosophies of budgeting, so that you're aware of our background and our standpoint on why do we put together the numbers that we do for your draft budget? What goes into that process? And we're also going to talk about some of the challenges that you are all facing as board members as we approach the end of a global pandemic, and also in the wake of the tragedy in Surfside, Florida. Your homeowners are calling us, you're calling us. There is an impact for what happened there. And how are we going to address those issues and move forward as a solid, stable community in whole? So we're going to break it out into that. And then at the end, the last half of our session, we're going to have Tim and David talk about, again, those legislative changes that are coming up. Getting right into it, many boards and many homeowners, the week after the Champlain Towers South building collapse happened, we got a ton of calls from our homeowners, from board members. You might have seen the piece we put out about structural engineering, and we have been keeping tabs with the city of Denver, with the city of Aurora. That's where most of our high rises are in this area. Talking to them about what kind of changes might they be anticipating and looking at as we move forward, so that we can help partner with you and stay on top of the building inspection changes, the reserve study changes, the different legislative actions that will be coming down the pike as a result of that. But many of you have been asking, what can we do to prepare our community and to make sure that this doesn't happen to us? There is a garage that collapsed in Denver 5 or 6 years ago. There are smaller citations of this kind of thing from happening. So we want to help you get to a great position so that you're able to make those repairs, communicate with your boards, with your homeowners, and make sure that you don't run into those kinds of situations. So preparation, communication, proactive maintenance. There are so many things that we can do as the boards and managers to help prevent that kind of thing happening. But the biggest thing is we have to work together for the success of our communities. So that's why we want to share truly the same information we're giving to our community managers, that we talk to our regional directors about, that we talk to homeowners at CAI functions. We want to tell you the same thing so everyone's on the same page and we truly work as a team together. So when we're doing the 2022 budgets this year, there were a lot of factors that have changed over the course of the past 2 years. We have housing implications. We have I don't know if it's hard or soft job market. I don't know which one it is, but it is bad right now. If any of you have tried to hire somebody in your own day jobs, it is very hard right now. So we have higher payroll costs. Our contractors have to pay their own staff more. Contractor costs are rising. The cost of goods and construction materials is going up. So we have so many different factors. We want to talk about what do we really have to look at when we are creating our 2022 budget, because it is a little bit different and it might be different for a couple of years before things settle back down again. First and foremost, we talk to your board or to your managers about the governing documents. What are the laws, state statutes, and documents that they need to be looking at? So way back in June, we were telling them, what is the statutory requirement for their approval process? When is their budget adoption meeting? When's the annual meeting? Is it the same meeting for this community? What do they have to do to prepare in advance? So looking at those documents, looking at Kiowa, looking at the other pieces to make sure that we are on set for each individual community, because every board has different parameters that they have to follow. While state statutes try and minimize the diversity in your processes, they still exist. So we have to look for those one-off situations that exist within your communities. We're going to talk during my portion of today's presentation about 3 main sections: our budget recommendations, maintaining and improving your financial health as a community association, timelines and deadlines, and then we're going to go over kind of our budget preparation checklist, what we go through with our managers as they're putting together your budget and how that applies to you as board members and what you should be looking for with that same checklist. First off, we're going to start with budget recommendations. These are really what I would categorize as our philosophies for creating community association budgets. The first thing, and I tout this whether I am talking to clients or I'm talking to members in an M100 class, which Dave has also taught, the budget isn't about a 2% increase or a 3% increase or no increase. The first thing I tell managers in budget training, the first thing I tell board members in budget training, how much the assessment goes up or down is secondary to the process. Go into it to prepare a realistic budget for your homeowners that will continue to provide the same level of service that you are currently providing without having to drastically cut anywhere. Then from there, if that is too much of an increase for your community or if it's unreasonable, you can then look at those line items as the board of directors and cut discretionary line items, things that maybe you don't need, or you can tighten your belt in certain areas. But that shouldn't be the first thing you look for, is we don't want to have an increase in assessments this year. Because if you don't have an increase in your assessments this year, especially in the economic environment we're in right now, you will have to cut other services. You will probably not have enough money to be able to continue to function as you are today. So you have to look at all of the expenses first and then think about that implication to your homeowners. Going into the budget process, preparing right now, your managers should be coming to you this month or next month and saying, hey, it's 98 cents here, $1.05 here. People still are writing checks, and sometimes those checks are written for the wrong amount and it's not the exact amount on their assessments. Clean up your small receivables balance, get that stuff kind of taken care of. And then the second and more important part of that is budgeting appropriately for bad debt. We don't like it. We don't like having to make other homeowners pay for homeowners that were bad citizens and didn't do their job appropriately. But the reality is your association gets X amount of money in, and if you don't get that money in, how do you make it up? You have to build it into next year's budget to make that deficit up. So talk to your collection attorneys, talk to your manager, talk to your auditor. What may not be recoverable? How are they going to attack the collections that you might have? And what are you going to budget for going forward? You have to talk about that. It's not a comfortable conversation, but you have to plan for that. So budgeting accurately for bad debt, very important. Understanding your reserve study. This is probably one of the most, I don't know what word I want to use. It is a very difficult area right now, especially with what happened in Reserve Study Florida. Reserve studies are under major scrutiny right now. You have reserve study companies that are engineers, that are civil engineers or structural engineers that come out and do your reserve study, and they're looking at various components. Or you could have someone who just went online and bought a program that does the actuarial math, and they're looking at your property and they're making a best guess estimate and they're giving you a reserve study. The price point between those is going to vary drastically, but regardless of who's doing the reserve study is looking for the remaining useful life of existing components. It is not, nor has it ever been intended to look at structural issues. They are not looking for those issues where the building may need major structural repair. It's looking for taking the wood trim off of the building, putting the wood trim back on the building, and painting it. Those things that we can take off and replace. Structural issues are the entire building component. You have to hire the appropriate engineers. That our managers are fantastic. I would never expect any of our managers to see a crack in the wall and go, yeah, I know what we can do to fix that. That is outside of our scope. That's outside of our box. We need to bring in professionals, bring in engineers. If you're having structural issues right now, if you know that you've got some problems, now is the time for you to start addressing those issues. Bring it, budget for some engineers, budget dollars, get bids now so you can build that in for 2022. That's what we do to prevent what happened in Surfside. Understanding that reserve study though, have your engineering company come out or have that person who completed that come out and talk to your board. Especially if you're getting an updated reserve study right now, you're going to see building component costs go way up. If you had a reserve study done 3 years ago, we have an example in our own portfolio. They're not here tonight, but we have a board of directors. 3 years ago, the reserve study was done and it said $40,000 for wood trim, $40,000 for painting. They got the bid for that phase of wood trim. Anyone want to gander a guess at how much it came in at? 80? 120? You were right. Wood trim estimated 3 years ago in a reserve study for $40,000. It might have been 44,372, something like that, but around 40 is $120,000 real dollars today, this year to get it done. Hopefully that settles back down for us. But in the meantime, we have to plan and think about it. You need to talk to your homeowners during the budget process. Maybe you don't want to double those numbers or have a reserve study redone right now, but talk to your board or your homeowners about the thought process the board has gone through, Communicate that out. Be transparent about how and why you're making decisions about your budget. That's what gets us in trouble, guys, is when we don't tell them what we're doing behind the scenes. They just think we're all cloak and dagger and we're just ignoring the process. Talk to your homeowners, especially this year. The amount of litigation coming out of SRSA, as these two gentlemen can probably tell you, is intense. Avoid that. Don't get in that position. Whatever process you have to go through to get from point A to point B, talk to your homeowners and start that conversation now. Some of you may be underfunded in your reserves right now. A lot of communities across the US are. How you get from point A to point B is part of the struggle. So how do we start having that conversation to increase reserve deposits, increase those contributions, and get to where you need to be? We can all help with that. That requires communication and having some of those tough talks. One of my favorite undisclosed or undiscussed, we put our head in the sand when we talk about excess income or especially excess deficit. What do I mean by that? Excess income or deficit. Every year you have a bucket of money you're pulling in, and then your expenses come in. At the end of the year, you either have more money because you underspent, so that's excess income, or your community spent more than you brought in income. That's a deficit. How do you make that deficit up? Well, Kiowa and your declarations and bylaws talk to you about how you make that up. You either charge the homeowner, you do a special assessment, you build it into next year's budget, but you have to be cognizant as board members that it exists. If it's $1,000, you can probably make a business decision that that's not a big deal. If it's $20,000, do you all have an excess $20,000 just laying around your checking account for your association? Year after year after year? Probably not. So you have to think about how that deficit impacts your association and how you're going to make that money up. We can't hide from that. We have to address excess income or excess deficit. If you have excess income, usually you guys are like, yay, we can put some more money in reserves, we can do this, we can do that. Awesome. We love it when you underspend and you're fiscally responsible, but we still have to have a decision, discuss, and what are we going to do with that money? What is going to happen with it? And then we have to tell the homeowners, what are we going to do with that money? So that we're being transparent and they know all of the decisions that the association is making. Last but not least, and I say this one with caution, is compare your financial position to similar associations. There are no two associations that are identical. You want to look at, oh, well, the assessments over there are only $200 a month and ours are $500 a month. From a manager standpoint, you can have two buildings, both built by D.R. Horton, right across the street from each other, both built this year in 2021. And in 5 years, those two buildings will look drastically different. They will have different financials, they will have different assessment amounts, they will have different maintenance programs. Why is that? Because every board is duly elected by their homeowners and make decisions in the best interest of their association. And no two boards make decisions similar or the same. There's always going to be differences. They could be identical buildings, and in 20 years, one could be falling apart and the other one could be in a great financial position. So when you ask us for the assessment amounts of other communities within our portfolio, that's really hard for us to justify that number and sharing that, because it's not appropriate for you to compare your assessment dollars to somebody else's, because it's not right. We can look at other benchmarking items. How much electricity are they using? How much water are they using? What kind of amenities do they have? What do those amenities cost them? We can dig down further and dig into what makes up those costs with benchmarking, but dollars to dollars, our assessments are double what that other building is. There's always a reason for that. So be mindful when your homeowners ask you about that. Your homeowners will say that in your budget meeting. You've heard that. I see heads nodding. You will hear that. You just have to remember that there have been 20 years of different boards and different people at both of those buildings. They're never going to be the same. Never. For the budget recommendations, I do want to tangent for just a second. So the Census Bureau in June, and they're doing a rolling survey right now through the end of the pandemic. And you can get more of this information on census.gov. They have lots of cool interactive maps. I want to show you a scary map though. This is the US, and these different colors indicate the percentage of homeowners who are currently behind on rent or mortgage payments, who answered to the US Census Bureau that they feel that they are very likely or somewhat likely to be evicted or foreclosed upon when the mortgage moratorium is lifted. In the state of Colorado, so you see all these different colors, you see the light one, medium light, medium dark, and then dark. That's Colorado. That's medium dark. That is, as of the June numbers, 30.4% of Colorado households, 30.4% of Colorado households answered that they were very likely or somewhat likely to be evicted or foreclosed upon at the end of the mortgage moratorium. That equates about 77,024 homes. My caution to you, we're starting to see delinquencies rise. We're starting to see that trend upward. As community associations, we're used to seeing a mortgage foreclosure here or an assessment foreclosure there, 1 or 2 a year. This is a tidal wave of evictions and foreclosures that is coming down the path. Look at your collection policies, my friends. Make sure that those policies are up to date. And you're actually going to be getting a questionnaire from your manager soon, so that we are working to make sure we're shoring up your collection processes in advance of what this could impact. This is worst case scenario, but our job is to prepare you for the worst case scenario. So we see these numbers coming through, and this is a scary number as a community manager, as a management company. Because when these hit the market and when they go to foreclosure, whether they're assessments or mortgage, they go to short sale, who's going to buy up 77,000 units in short sale? Probably not first-time home buyers, given the financial situation of most people right now. They're going to be corporations. What happens when a bunch of corporations buy units in your associations? You have rentals, and you have more rentals. And we deal with what we dealt with in 2008, 2009. That's why over the next couple of months, you'll be hearing a lot from our managers about policies. What do you have in place when it comes to collections, when it comes to rentals? We want to make sure, even if it doesn't happen, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. That's our job. Our job is to get you prepared for those things. So if they do happen, it's not a disaster within your community. We want to avoid any sort of downturn or issues that we had with the Great Recession. So we want to keep you prepared then. I'm going to come back to budgets now that I shared that lovely positive news with you about where we're at. But it leads well into improving your financial health for your community. These people in the room right now, those of you who may be listening, because we're going to send this out as a recording to board members that couldn't attend, you're the ones that care. You are here educating yourselves because you want to do better by your communities. And it's not that you're doing badly, it's that you care. You're the volunteers that really give back to the associations. But there are some out there that don't have a great financial position right now. So how do we help go from good to great? Number one, you might think that I left that in there, that was a typo, but nope, I left it in there on purpose. Draft a realistic budget. Don't start with a dollar or a percentage in mind. Go with the expenses. I say it because it's important. That is the number one downfall I see with community associations is, I didn't raise assessments for 10 years when I was president. In 22, almost 23 years of doing this, I can tell you, when that happens, when you get to that 11th year, there's either a special assessment or a 20% increase in assessment. We have to make up that balance somehow. Every year you're not increasing your assessments for cost of living, et cetera, you're cutting other services out of your budget, or you're deferring maintenance or deferring reserve contributions. And that is one of the biggest points that Surfside has brought to mind for us. Kicking the can down the road is not going to work anymore. We can't keep pushing it off. And you'll have homeowners who say, I don't care about that. I'm going to be dead when that needs to be replaced. Well, it's you using it now, you're paying your contribution for your use. And then as you come into a community as a new homeowner, you're also paying in for the replacement of those items. It equalizes the contributions between all of them. You have to continually be making those contributions. It's really important. Updating a reserve study, the standard for years has always been 3 to 5 years. I'm gonna tell you, you probably need to do it 3 years. I think 5 years now is just becoming too long to have an accurate reserve study. The market is just too tumultuous right now. Complete your third-party financial reviews per either your governing documents or Kiowa. Make sure you're getting those done and you're providing those disclosures to your homeowners. And maintain an adequate cash balance. It's hard for you as a board, it's hard for your vendors and business partners, and it's hard for your manager when you are constantly running almost at zero in your checking account. Because then we have to pick and choose who do we pay. Who's screaming the loudest? Who can we pay? Try to maintain a cushion in your checking account of 1 to 3 months of assessments. That way, if there is a financial crisis, you've got a couple of months of expenses while you figure out what kind of thing is happening so you can get where you need to be. Have a little bit of cushion there so that you can absorb expenses if something comes up. And then these aren't only financial policies on the slide, but follow your association's financial policies. Kiowa requires them for a reason, and there are some that are non-Kiowa, so pre-Kiowa associations and post-Kiowa. They're in Kiowa because they're a good idea to have these, and those of you that are required to have them, follow them. Once you do them, you should not just, here you go, we did them, we passed them out, and now we're not gonna worry about it anymore. You have to follow what's in those documents. If it doesn't work anymore, revise the policy, but follow your policies. They're there for a reason. Could be a litigious issue, I'll let them deal with that if you don't follow the policies. Not my bailiwick. Timelines and deadlines. Your managers have been working on and going through budget training since June. June, July, August, we're doing training, we're refreshing everybody on the budget template, we're talking about the budgeting process and getting bids and reviewing your current year's expenses. So we're doing all of that in September, October. You should be reviewing that draft budget that our managers have put out to you. You're going to be making revisions, having discussions, talking about how you want to modify that document before you approve it to be mailed to the homeowners. And then you'll have your adoption meeting sometime. But some of you start having them as soon as this month. But between now and December is really our busy time getting those budgets adopted, getting them done, and pushed out the door so you have coupon books or statements done. Before, my goal would be that all of you have statements or coupons before December 15th, but we just got to make sure we get all those budget adoptions done in advance. Is your manager taken when preparing your budget? And this is where I want you to think about these same things that we preach to the managers every year when we talk about budgets. Reviewing your current year expenses, looking at that contract log, what's out there, what's expiring, what do we need to bid out, your reserve study, payroll forecasts, utility budgets, and a board wish list for improvements. So this year, when we're doing the budget for next year, why do we care about what we spent this year? Because there could be trends that we can analyze and look at. Your managers aren't just looking at the expenses that you've already spent. We're forecasting out what we anticipate you will be spending between now and the end of the year, between now and December 31st, so that we can think about and have a conversation with you that, ooh, spending in maintenance is double what it was last year because we've had these couple of problems. That means we're going to have a deficit at the end of this year. What do we want to do about that deficit? We look at this year's expenses and even 2020's expenses to look at those trends, do the analysis so that we can have a conversation with you about where we're going to wind up at the end of this year. Because again, excess revenue and deficit, that's something you need to think about as you're preparing your 2022 budget. So we're going to talk about those and have that discussion so that if there is a major deficit, that we are planning proactively for it. And hey, if you have surplus income, awesome. We also need to talk about, are we applying that to reserve contributions? What are we doing with it? And how are we going to communicate to the homeowners about it? Logs, certainly we want to encourage you to have multi-year contracts for things because that helps us stabilize your budget. We know what those increases are longer term, so that helps us plan out, not only as the managers, but for you as the board of directors as well. But there are provisions in some of those contracts you don't like. If they're coming up for renewal, the managers need to be coming to you and having that conversation. We're with ABC Elevator right now. Are we happy with them? Are we not happy? Do we want to go out to bid? Do we just want to leave it alone? Or are we so unhappy, we're ready to sever this relationship and we need to go out to bid? We're going to write those specs, get that information to you so that we can move forward and get those proposals for next year. So there's more than just looking at the contract log. We want to be proactive about getting new bids and getting things moving forward. I think I've beaten the reserve study enough today, so I'll skip over that one. But payroll forecasts. I spoke earlier, the hiring market right now is so hard. You can go to McDonald's or Chick-fil-A and get a job for $18 an hour. That is hurting our contractors out there. They are having to pay more and more. The landscaping services have to pay more. It's across the board. So if you have staff on site at your communities, you may know that we're having a hard time filling some of those, especially maintenance positions are really hard to fill right now because there's such a high demand for them. So how do we work around that? What other things can we do? Can we job share with another building? Can we have somebody part-time? Do we hire a third-party service, etc.? You have to keep that in mind as we're doing the budgets this year. Utilities are always a bone of contention with our communities. We do have a tracking system. We're communicating with all of the local municipalities, the counties, the metro districts to get how much is water going up, what's electricity going up to. Excel has just put out their listing for next year's prices. So getting that information so that we're putting accurate estimates into your 2022 budgets. And then I would normally say last but not least, but it's not the least thing. We also want to talk to our boards about what kind of wish list items do you want to do? We need to cover what items are in the reserve study that you need to be looking at doing and planning for, but also what do you want to do as a board? Do you want to start a social committee? Do you want to increase community participation and awareness? Do you want to add a gazebo in to have some place for people to congregate outside and have some events? What kinds of things do you really want to do or add? And how can we work those into the budget? Are they feasible? Are they reasonable? What can we do? What do we have to plan for long term? And then even those items are things we want to communicate out to your homeowners so they know that it's not just your board running the numbers and pushing things forward, that you really are looking at things for the long-term benefit of your community as a whole. So hopefully those pieces help. And we talk about really why each one matters, and you can help share that information with your homeowners. This is one of my favorite quotes when it comes to budgeting, is that the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. We need to plan for those things now. There are difficult conversations ahead for some of our communities. There are plenty of associations, again, across the US, not just here in the Denver market, but across the US that have underfunded over the years. Now is the time for us to have that conversation with our homeowners. If you are in a community that is facing serious financial concerns going forward, now is the time for us to take action and move things forward so that we can get you out of that hole. Use this emotional hook that we have right now with Surfside to educate your homeowners within your community who might be pushing back on some of those things so that you can get to where you need to be, so that you can pass an appropriate budget, fix things, and get things where you need to go. With that, I will get off of my high horse about budgets and financials, and I would love to introduce Mueller Graff. We have Tim Mueller and David Graff here today to talk to you about all of these legislative updates that are coming through. I do have to do a quick mic change with one of them. You got the clicker.
Hey everybody, David Graff, Tim Mueller, thanks for being here. And talk is time. I just cut out. Did you cut me out? Maybe. It's timely. That sort of thing has really changed a lot of consciousness in communities and media and managers. We've had a lot of interesting conversations about funding club both. Sorry, I guess I'll just
Doesn't matter if I turn it on or off now.
Okay.
Now you just have to use that one.
Must have a magnetic personality.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Sorry about that.
Supposed to do that. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's okay.
It's got to have a sound, man. Thank you. What was I saying? Oh, yeah, about financial conversations to the point where we've had to teach classes. We've worked with Hammersmith to talk to managers about how to talk to homeowners about money and how to deal with people in contentious meetings, because it's coming up over and over again. So we see when no one's looking the amount of preparation and training that goes into running a professional management company, and I can tell you they are definitely diligent in trying to get ahead of this curve. But we're not here to talk about gloom and doom. We're here to talk about sunshine and light, which is legislation. Oh, he wanted to introduce us.
Just to let you know, I'm the Mueller of the Mueller Graff, Tim Mueller, David Graff. We're a law firm that all we do is represent community associations. We don't represent any other entities, individuals, anything. It's all community associations in the state of Colorado. Super grateful to Hammersmith us. Trust us with you all tonight. Hopefully we won't do anything to that trust. But we appreciate you guys having us. We have 10 attorneys in our law firm, and like I said, represent hundreds of associations. And we have, David and I both at different times sat on the Colorado Legislative Action Committee for the Community Association Institute nationally. And so we've met with the representatives who created these, and I will tell you.
Wait, don't say it. We're being recorded.
No, I was just going to say, I'll tell you that what is here, what we did get is far less than what it was proposed right before COVID hit. It was a lot more that was proposed, and I sat down with Representative Tone to discuss a lot of these things. So this is quite a bit less than what we may have had. So with that.
So you should be grateful.
So you should be grateful.
Thank you.
So let's talk about flags. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So you may recall that Kiowa had a previous carve out for political signs and American flags. The American flags were allowed at any time, although we could have restrictions on the size, location of flags and flagpoles. Military flags were also protected, and for political flags and signs, By the way, when I use flags, flags were never an issue until the 2020 election. I don't remember ever having sent out a letter for a flag prior to the 2020 election. But now we have a separate provision. But it used to say, and I'll go through this again, but just so that we're on the same page, if the association's governing documents had a sign restriction, then the law overrode that and said that political signs, right, because politicians write the laws, political signs can be displayed 45 days before and 7 days after the election. And people could have one sign per elected office and per ballot measure, which is a lot of signs. Okay, that's gone. Gone, completely gone. That statute has been replaced with this new one that is, it's a work in progress. We don't really know how this is going to shake out, but the thing that you want to remember is you cannot regulate flags or signs by content unless they're commercial speech. So if somebody has, hired this roofing company or what have you, we could regulate that, but we can't regulate signs or flags by content. Doesn't sound like a big deal, does it? Wait, just wait. Go ahead.
And we've already had questions. So first of all, we know as much as you do about what this means, right? It says what it says. It hasn't even been enacted yet. I mean, it's not even a law until the 7th, I think. And so we don't know. We can only guess. But it's interesting with commercial message. We've already had people call it. Well, the Broncos are a professional team. They make money. So can we prohibit those Bronco flag? We've already had those kind of questions. I don't think that that's what they meant, right? So all we can do as lawyers is to guess. Like, I don't think that's really what they meant. I think if you start prohibiting Broncos flags, you may have it
It's not 100% guesswork in our office. But on this, it is actually, because, and that's the conversation. We've taken the position that commercial speech is anything that's put out there to sell something, product, service, like I said, roofing company or what have you. I don't know that, if you had an Uber or Lyft sign or flag in front of your house, that would necessarily be commercial, but we don't really know in the gray area between the two extremes. And just because it's, a Nike flag or the Broncos, don't ever touch the Broncos flag. I can't believe they didn't provide statutory protection for the Broncos flag, but they did not. Instead, they said you can't regulate anything. And so it's kind of an interest. And so there's a little snarkiness creeping into my voice now, because I personally believe that homeowners come to associations to get rid of some of this flotsam and jetsam that people accumulate in their front yard, including signs and flags. And now we've lost a huge opportunity, I think, to provide the aesthetics that people want. But it's not just about aesthetics, right? Let's just say, and we've had this happen already before the law took effect, someone puts up a Black Lives Matter sign. And of course, then their neighbor puts up a Confederate flag sign. Do you think that person might think that's hate speech? I would suspect that they would. How about an anti-abortion sign? Probably not something, whichever position you may take, it may not be something you want to see from your neighbor's front yard. Protected speech. Now, that's where the problem, I think, is going to be, where we're going to have people exhibiting their unique tastes as Americans with their signs and flags, and coming to us, association professionals, managers, boards, saying, hey, can you get rid of this sign or flag? And the answer is probably not. That's going to be the problem, we think. So in 2016, HUD, the federal agency that oversees housing, took some of their employment law standards and superimposed them into the housing context. And what they're called is the 2016 quid pro quo and hostile environment standards. The quid pro quo in the employment context is sex for your continued employment. And we haven't yet had a case where an architectural committee member said sex for the approval of your fence color, but that may be coming down the pike. But hostile environment is a real serious issue, because the law stands for the proposition that if there is someone who is being discriminated against, meaning someone is violating the covenants because someone's in a protected class, race, gender, sexual orientation, creed, national origin, marital status, and blending the federal and the state protected classes. But if they're being discriminated against because their status in a protected class, then the association has the authority to take action to stop that conduct, and doesn't, then the association is responsible for the fair housing violation. And that's been the law since 2016. Haven't yet had, knock on wood, one of those cases go to the Civil Rights Commission. But that's the other thing that we're going to see. In fact, I got accosted by one of the Hammersmith managers who I'm looking at right now when I walked in here on this very issue. How do we deal with a 2016 quid pro quo hostile environment when someone puts up a hate speech sign or flag? My answer is you probably can't do anything about it, because the quid pro quo hostile environment law says if you have the ability to address the conduct and you don't, you're responsible for a fair housing violation. Now we can't regulate content. So it's going to be interesting. And we've had some wild signs and flags before this law took effect. We had what I would call an exaggerated Halloween decoration where two warring neighbors were putting up stuff. And one of the people put up a tombstone with the neighbor's name, their date of birth, and the date of death had question marks underneath it. They feared for their lives, right? And then when we wrote the letter, the neighbors really doubled down, and I won't go into detail what they said then. Now, maybe we have very little recourse in making those things go away. I think it's a problem. Anybody else agree it's a problem?
Yes.
Question. Jess, you're saying I agree it's a problem.
I think there's a lot of unintended consequences. You know, there was a few stories that you probably saw that where there's a flag that was denied because previously an association could say the only flags you can have are the American flag and the service members' flags as delineated in the statute. That's it. And so if someone put up their Black Lives Matter flag and the association said it's prohibited, that made huge news. And so the politicians were like, holy cow, we can't have this. And so, but I think that like David said, there might be some warring neighbor things going on to the point where this gets out of hand. And I think that's maybe an unintended. You have a question?
I did. Which congressperson is sponsoring the flag and
The question is, which is the congressperson sponsoring the sign or flag
I
bill?
know that 1229 Tatone was involved in.
So I have a
1310 is Cutter, Burnett, Byrd, Duran, Herod, Putin, Monty, Michelson, Janet. I mean, a whole bunch, including Tatone.
Yeah, so what I think, so first of all, don't do anything with respect to those names. These are, protected people. And I think they were acting generally with good intentions. And one of the things that gets confusing about this is this right of free speech and free expression. You may have heard of the US Constitution, the First Amendment, right? And it says that, people have the right to free speech. Well, what we forgot, I think, was that the Constitution applies to originally federal government, then extended to the state governments. The 14th Amendment doesn't apply to HOAs. They're creatures of contract where you don't have constitutional rights protecting you from your HOA. The idea is great. Yeah, you have freedom of expression, and we would love to have freedom of expression. We would also like, in very limited circumstances, freedom from other people's expression to the extent that it's tremendously annoying or distasteful. We're just going to have to see how it shakes out. I suspect that we'll see a cleanup bill. I don't know that. I don't have any scuttlebutt yet because it hasn't even taken effect in another couple of days. But it's good in that it gets boards and managers out of the conversation. Which speech do you restrict, right? You say it's okay for Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, love is love, Broncos maybe, not Steelers, not Raiders. When you start picking and choosing who gets to display what flag or sign, it's very, very difficult to do so in a fair manner. And from that perspective, it's great. Right? We're kind of free from that very difficult conversation with our neighbors as to what we think we should allow and not allow. Pretty much anything, just no commercial speech. But like I said, I think we missed an opportunity to protect homeowners to be free from hate speech or vulgar speech or obscenity or something. Yeah. Well, I don't think so. So, I'm sorry, you are getting ahead of so we don't have to allow it on common elements, just so we know that. So we can adopt flag rules, and the criteria are different from flags or signs. You can restrict the quantity, don't say zero, the location, and the size of flags and flagpoles. There's a case out in another state applying the First Amendment analysis, and they said that restriction limiting to 3 flags was unconstitutional. In some states, the Constitution has been applied to associations, not here. But no, I don't think it would. I would love that. I think it would make a lot of sense. And the funny thing is that, in my perspective, the American flag rule in the 45 days before and the 7 days after that used to exist worked beautifully. Nobody really complained. So one of the questions we get is, well, can we tell them they have to put their sign or flag in their window well below ground level? Probably not going to fly, right? There's going to be a lot of gamesmanship going on here, and we wrote a rule that like 52 pages long saying you can't have a three-sided sign, you can't have a 5-sided sign, you can't have an 8-sided sign spinning with lights and sirens, you can't do any of that. So we're not yet sure how the boundaries of this are going to shake out, and they're going to end up in front of a judge. And the judge is going to say, you know what, I don't know what the statute really means in terms of the ability of an association to adopt these criteria. So I'm just going to go with what I think is reasonable. And the judge, she gets to decide. So we would say couple, at least, I think. Tim?
Yeah, I would just say, maybe don't try to be the test case. Don't try to limit your flags to those little teeny ones. Say, hey, that's maybe you can get any flag, right? Don't try to limit the number to 0. I mean, don't try to
Be cute. Don't be cute in
this
this.
because you just don't want to be the first test case. There will be a test case out there, right? Someone's going to test it and push it. But it costs a lot of money to do that. So you may want to, try to be reasonable before you go down that road.
You have a question, yes?
Verbiage that you would recommend that we use in bylaws to people came to us this past election and said, this is what you say on your rules that you wrote 20 years ago, but yet now you're saying I can't. So.
Yeah, we're running a special tonight only. No. Yeah, we do. And so one of the questions that we sometimes get is where we have a declaration that may have a sign or flag restriction saying you can't have them. We have communities that say none. You can't even put up a for sale sign. And that's been upheld. What we say is it's helpful. We may not have the luxury of getting our declaration amended to comply with the law, because it requires usually 2/3 of the owners to approve. So we would adopt a policy saying, notwithstanding section 2.2 in the declaration prohibiting all signs and flags, pursuant to 1310, here's what we allow. We allow flags and signs unrestricted by content, but we have location and size criteria as follows. Commercial flags or signs are hereby prohibited, or they're not. It's up to you. So yes, the short answer is we would revise the rule. Because if we don't revise the rule, it tells owners that they're going to be reading from the wrong sheet of music. They may actually take their flag or sign down, and then they're talking to their neighbor at the mailbox, and the neighbor says, "Oh, you didn't know that? There's a statute that says they can't do that." And they're like, "Those bastards at the HOA, they didn't tell me that I had the right to put up this." We don't want to do that. Right now, people are a little bit touchy. Have you noticed? Just a tiny little bit. So yeah, it's going to be a sensitive issue.
Yeah, we do it by policy.
Oh, that was
We're
two
doing
word
it-
answer.
We're doing a bunch.
Yeah, and so signs, and we don't. So here's kind of the frustrating part, and why Tim suggests that everything we do is from a magic 8-ball where we go yes or no for the answer. We can adopt sign criteria on other objective factors beyond size, placement, and quantity. Other objective factor. No idea what that means. Objective factors. Lawyer's dream. We could argue about this for years. What's that? Only cotton. Organic cotton. In Boulder, maybe, anyway. Yeah, so we don't know what that means, and I would suggest not pushing the envelope because we don't want any of our clients to be a test case if they can help it. If it was hate speech, we contact the municipality and see if they would get involved for obscenity, but it has to get pretty bad before the municipality will get involved. And I've called a few over the years, and they've usually just said, go away. So I suspect that they will be similarly reluctant because they are First Amendment protect actors, they're state government, and so they have the First Amendment issue to worry about that we don't necessarily have to worry about. Yeah.
Something from that just last week.
Uh-huh.
I was close to the window, partially could have the window cover,
Mhm.
and they do have a rule in their declarations about
Competing restrictions. I would thank my lucky stars that you can't see their marijuana grow operation now that they've covered the windows. I'd say, great. That's a tough one. For those in the back, she's saying we have a restriction where you have very specific window coverings that you can install in your windows because that affects the aesthetics of the homes or the units. and someone put a flag in there. I would suggest right now that it's probably protected because it's inside their unit. I wouldn't touch it until someone else took that to the Colorado Supreme Court. What do you think, Jim?
I think the first thing I'd ask is there any place else that they can put it? If that's really the only window, then it is a place that they can display it. So if it's a condominium and they've got a front door and one window facing frontwards, and that's the only place, then I'm with David. If it's a single family home and they might be able to put it somewhere else, it's ours, then maybe we can talk and say, hey, this says this, but we still want you to put your sign up, so is there another place? Maybe there's a negotiation to happen there, but if they're kind of limited, then I'm with David.
Yeah, so for everyone with a pencil and paper, write down that Tim Muller said you call up that owner and you tell them where they can put their flag. At 45 days before and 7 days after, just so we're all on the same page, go on. Doesn't matter if it's American flag, Lithuanian flag, near and dear to my heart, although I've not been there and have no Lithuanian blood that I know of, anything goes. So that's where we are. I think it's a little bit of good intentions going haywire. And just stay calm and explain to your owners this is what's allowed. And if they want to complain, which they will be concerned, understandably, but just say, here's what the statute says. Help us find a solution. We think that we're constrained by state law, and sorry. Question?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
What about a tattered US?
Tattered U.S. flag. Well, that's funny because it used to be that if you flew your American flag in violation of the U.S. flag code, which I believe don't quote me on this, but I think it prohibits flying flags in a less than stellar condition. It would be a violation of the flag code, and I think under the old law you could have dealt with it. Now there's nothing in, so you could.
The old law actually cited to the flag code, to the U.S. flag
Right.
code, said you can fly your American flag, with the flag code. Now they just
Got rid of it.
And so that doesn't mean the U.S. flag code doesn't still exist. It does, but as an association, are we going to be the enforcers of the, U.S. code? And probably no one.
The answer is no. No, that's a lawyer's way of saying no. We're not going to touch it because it says that we can adopt flag rules regarding quantity, location, size of flags and flagpoles, not structural integrity of the fabric and the fadedness of the color and the smell and the sound it makes when the wind blows gently. We're not going to have criteria on this. Sorry, I wouldn't touch that one either. We didn't have the case, but you may remember reading this one in the news about it in the newspaper, seeing it on the news about 10 years ago. There's a community up north where a person was flying the flag upside down to indicate that the country was in distress because we invaded Iraq under George Bush. That was more than 10 years ago. And the association pursued that person because that violated the federal flag code, because you're not supposed to just willy-nilly fly the flag upside down unless you. And I talked to the board at a CAI function. They said, we got tired of the 15th time we got our knock on a door and there was a camera with a light on it saying, why on earth are we pursuing this ridiculous claim? They just dropped it. And that's kind of the scenario where we're in here, whereas the law favors the person flying the flag, not the people trying to assure minimum aesthetic standards in the community. I wouldn't do that. Would you agree? Or just ask to sell it for them for free.
A lot of your declarations say, have some general blanket statement about, you can't violate the law in our community. So, there's going to be someone that will go after that saying, well, you're violating the U.S. flag code. But I think it's going to be tough. And just for the record, that kind of hurts my heart for the, my both grandpas served in World War II. So I'd like to see the American flag in good condition, just so that we're clear. But again, what David said is, I don't know if the members in your community are going to want to spend the money to pursue that one or not. So it's unfortunate, but maybe it's tough.
What you might do as a community is take up a collection plate and offer them a new flag and see if they take you up on it. And then when you get the news crews coming, you say, well, we bought them a new one and offered it to them, but they were intent on flying it in disrepair. Shame on them. This is something we might consider this conversation, continue this over drinks at a bar. This is the type of conversation we're having. So let's talk about stuff that's really important. AstroTurf. You joke. My neighbor just this week requested my approval for him to put AstroTurf in his backyard. Yeah. So this is,
We live on the same street, by the way.
we don't see enough of each other during the day, so give each other the finger as we're driving past each other. So this is,
Cut that out.
oh yeah, please censor that. Leave it. Great neighbors we are. But the idea of AstroTurf obviously is for water conservation. From that perspective, it makes perfect sense, right? And you may not have read the news lately, but we're having problems getting enough water to the western United States. Those of us who like to go to Lake Powell and Houseboat have trouble doing so, and parts of the Middle East are drying up. So this is in line with that conservation laws that really took off many years ago. 2005, we had xeriscaping restrictions where we can't prohibit xeriscaping. Now we have non-vegetative turf grass, which is, I used to call it AstroTurf, thinking of that cheap green carpet you can get at Home Depot, but it's AstroTurf is actually a trademark name, and it's a quality athletic product. I did not know that. I learned this in looking it up. So AstroTurf, if people put in AstroTurf, we're probably doing great because that stuff looks good and lasts really long. But that cheap, thin green carpet, I think that's a problem. It's not non-vegetative turf grass. It's ugly carpet, so we could probably keep that out. Now, the law says for AstroTurf, oh, by the way, they're not all changes to Kiowa. The Water Conservation Board statute, I think, is in Title 37. So if you're looking in Kiowa, you won't see all of the restrictions in that. But we can't prohibit it in the backyard. We can prohibit it in the front yard. So, and the language in the statute, of course, like anything hastily done by people who don't care about the topic, has I'm just kidding. Has inconsistencies within the language, but we're not exactly sure what it means. That can we say you can only have 2 square feet in your backyard, or does the whole backyard get to be paved over with that beautiful plastic green stuff? We don't know. You can have aesthetic criteria prohibiting it in the front yard. And what we would suggest is that it says that you can adopt reasonable aesthetic criteria and you can prohibit it in the front yard, which suggests to me that you might want something on the books, meaning in your architectural criteria or your rules and regs, to say it's not going to come in the front yard, so that you don't get caught flat-footed when someone wants to put it in their front yard and you don't have any criteria. Because people who are going to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on plastic grass are usually pretty committed to that idea. And I think once we figure out a way to, to change the color, I can't think of the term, to brown so that it looks dormant in the winter, it will be in everybody's yard across the West. Right now, because it looks green and the neighbor's grass is brown, doesn't look necessarily appealing, but once they figure that to change color, it's going to be, I think, everywhere. So be careful in saying no, and usually when you say no, don't laugh when they ask for AstroTurf in their backyard, because believe it or not, it is protected by law now.
Yeah, there's some really decent looking stuff
Beautiful,
these days that
beautiful
you'd be surprised. And I have no idea how expensive it is. You said 20, 30.
Yeah, we have one already. We bought this one.
But they are getting much better. So, you know, you may want to look at, like David said, get some guidelines about where they can have it, how much it can cover, and maybe what it looks like. So it's not that really cheap stuff that we all think of right off the bat that they roll out at the Home Depot. So you may want to think about getting some guidelines, because later we're going to discuss things like that with regard to renewable energy, where they say you have to tell us exactly why you said no.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to fly a giant AstroTurf flag in your front yard and see how that. I just thought of a great idea. I'm going to go order it tonight. Okay. So backyard is not defined, and of course, backyard is that's another issue, right? Because we have houses that have front yards that look like backyards and vice versa, or they might be on a corner or on a curve where there really is not a good way to tell what is the front yard and backyard, and that might be something that we would define with criteria. Could include a limited common element. Some houses have weird lot lines where their backyard is actually their neighbor's property, but they have an exclusive easement to use it. A little bit more complicated, but none of that is taken into account in the statute. They just said plastic grass good in the statute, and that's what we have to work with. So another change is association records, and as you recall from 2014, when we amended 317 of Kiowa on the records inspection front, records was and still is a hotly contested issue. don't know about you, but I haven't seen a lot of association records that keep me up reading them at night, but people are fighting over them tooth and nail right now. We're getting all kinds of records inspections. We got a records inspection back into the 80s. Like, what on earth could have happened in the 80s that matters now? Not architectural plans, not warranties, just, you know, what were the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting in 1982, February 23rd? I need it within 7 hours because I'm writing a thesis or something. That's what's going on in the world. And I know managers are like, yeah, we're getting crazy records inspection requests. One of the things that has been a hot topic in Colorado and nationally is this idea of a transfer fee. And there's a couple uses of the term transfer fee. But generally, in today's context, it's a fee that the management company will typically charge to administer or facilitate a closing. And that includes providing records, answering questions, filling out a lender questionnaire that says you promise there's no special assessments. There's a whole bunch of other things that they're changing the ownership records, and they charge a fee for that. And the idea is that the management company should not charge all of the owners a transfer fee, just charge the people who are making them do additional work, charge the transfer fee. For some reason, there are people in Colorado that just are opposed to it philosophically for reasons that I cannot tell you. And they've been attacking it, trying to keep transfer fees from being charged, which ultimately, in my opinion, means that everybody pays more, even if they're not selling their home. Okay, that's fine. Now, any transfer fee schedule that the management company has will have to be kept as part of the association's permanent records and provided to owners upon their request. It's kind of like the camel's nose under the tent, I think, to try to limit those transfer fees. So we just have to be diligent on seeing how that creeps up. I don't know what people's opinions are, but every management company that I know charges them, and I haven't figured out a more fair way to get the work done without it having to be subsidized by people who are not selling their homes. That's my personal opinion. Questions on that? Anybody want to buy an AstroTurf flag for their front yard? Sir, yes. Sure.
Is this a charge for extra cost by the management company, or is it just our?
It's my understanding is that it's an extra cost for labor and risk and time that is spent facilitating the closing. It's a fee for a service. And there was a transfer fee statute probably 10 years ago, I'm guessing, that prohibited certain transfer fees if it wasn't a fee for service. Because this is way longer conversation, but people were recording transfer fee covenants that required that every time the house was sold, they'd have to write a check to somebody for as long as the house was in existence. The legislature said, no, you can't do that, but they were not specifically banning fees for service. So it is a fee for service. Is that
it's listed, it doesn't say that, it doesn't say it's a fee for service, that's not what the statute says, but yeah, I mean, that's what they're talking about. The statute says you have to give people this list, you have to not give it to them, but it has to be part of your permanent record. List of the current amounts of all unique and extraordinary fees, assessments, and expenses that are chargeable by the association in connection with the purchase or sale of the unit and are not paid for through assessments, including that it names all the names that these have been called in the past, right? Transfer fees, change fees, status letter, statement of assessment, all these things, right? So that's what it says. It doesn't say anything in there about it has to be designated as part of the labor that, you know, but it just says if you have any extraordinary.
So we're about Jessica, we're about 3 minutes out from Q&A. Is that right? Okay. I didn't see a giant hook here. Maybe that's one my mic has.
Yeah.
So one of the other things they said, they clarified as clear as mud, additional charges that the association can charge for copying, for administering records inspection requests. And it used to be the cost of production and reproduction of the records. And they added on the cost of copying, mailing, and any necessary special processing. No idea.
This is what we're gonna find over, right?
Necessary special processing. Yeah,
You're gonna make a lot of money on that.
we produced all of the records on 14-foot long pieces of paper and then rolled it up with wooden scrolls, and we dressed in medieval costumes and walked it over to the homeowner's house to deliver it. That's necessary special processing. That might not fly in some counties in front of a judge. I wouldn't try it. I would let somebody else. But anyway, that's another vague term that suggests it recognizes the fact that these records inspection requests are time consuming and expensive for associations, but they didn't keep us out of litigation with that vague language. And then they've also said bad associations, if a homeowner requests records and you don't give them to them within 30 days of the request, then you're going to have to pay a penalty of $50 a day, retroactive to the 11th day after it was due, up to $500, or their actual damages, whichever are greater. Does anybody want to stay on the board now? I'm just kidding. Stay. It matters. It matters tremendously. So now there's a monetary penalty for failing to turn over records, and for us, at least in our office, we're not seeing an issue where associations are just saying we're not going to give the records to you. What we're seeing is arguments about which records have to be produced, because there's some records that the law doesn't say homeowners have to get and probably shouldn't have. And that's what we're fighting over. So the $500 penalty, I don't love it. I don't see it being the end of the world, but it's going in the wrong direction, where volunteers who are working diligently and quietly out of the limelight are being placed under microscopes that I think are untenable for good people to volunteer. The law is still very protective of volunteers, but we've got to, I think, get that pendulum swinging back to recognizing the sacrifices that you all make on behalf of your neighbors. Let's see. Oh, solar panels and wind turbines, already a law, but now it used to say we couldn't materially increase the cost of installation or performance or efficiency. Materially was the term. Now they've quantified it by 10%. If some aesthetic criteria that we have governing solar panels and wind turbines increases the cost of installation or operation or reduces its efficiency by more than 10%, void is a matter of law. And if we don't approve it within 60 days, it's approved, and we have to tell them exactly why it's not allowed. Again, solar panels and wind turbines, haven't had a lot of wind turbine cases, had a lot of solar panel disputes. Just be careful. Right?
So, and some of you may have declarations that say, if we don't approve it in 30 days, it's deemed not approved. This is going to override it with regard to these things, with regard to the solar panel, any renewable energy device, which is typically the solar panel. Just be aware of that. The 60 days will override that provision, so you can't hide behind that with regard to these.
Yeah, your managers know this back and forth. They have been diligently trying to figure out what this says. Questions? Anyone on anything?
I've got a question about sunshine laws and how those affect HOA meetings.
As long as they don't materially decrease the efficiency of the solar panel, the sunshine, no, I'm just kidding. So sunshine laws generally is a term to describe state government, school boards, public governments, what have you. What they say essentially is that all meetings are open, and if a certain number of elected officials accidentally meet in an elevator, it triggers a meeting, and they have to either disperse or call it a meeting and follow all those formalities. Those don't apply to associations per se. Kiowa in 308 says all meetings of the association and the board and the committees of the board are open to owners or their designees. It also says that owners or their designees have the right to speak before the board takes action on an agenda item, and they have generally an opportunity to participate, and the right to inspect records. So what the sunshine laws have this unique characteristic, which is if we have 5 board members meet at a golf course, at Starbucks, in an elevator, it's a meeting. Not so with associations. So you could meet at a Starbucks as friends and talk about other things, and you wouldn't be in violation of the sunshine law. We would be cautious in having association board members meet out of public and talk about association business, because right now people are smelling conspiracies everywhere. You may have turned on the news, right? And what happens is this type of work that most homeowners would never do in a million years for pay, which you guys do for free without that recognition. They don't want anything to do with it generally, as long as they get to choose whether they want to participate or not. As soon as you take that right away, it becomes irresistible. My advice is don't do anything in private as a board if you can help it. Whether you can defend it legally or not is different than whether or not the owners will find out and will be outraged that they were not included in the right to participate regarding your association. To me, that's the next frontier, is We're gonna act as if the sunshine laws apply because that's what our owners these days seem to expect. That's my experience. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Awesome. Great question. Anybody else? I'll promise you I'll say it's a great question, even if it's not. No, guys? Just want to get out of here. James. I said that in a very disrespectful way. I didn't mean it that way. In fact, home rule municipalities. Oh my God, he's gonna have me a question. That's a good question. I don't believe that going to a home rule municipality status specifically overrides covenants. Now, the municipal code could, as an example, and I've never seen this, so that I may be passing on bad information, but the town of Parker, I have been told many times, has a municipal ordinance that says associations can't regulate parking on public streets, even if their covenants say that they can, as an example. In that case, the municipality would override the covenants, and we would say, yeah, you can't do that. Most of the cases, we have the ability by contract, all the homeowners buy in and agree to that contract known as the declaration to abide by those covenants. And unless the municipality confers a right on the owners that we can't take away, we can almost always be more restrictive. So it's not on my horizon that we're going to find any huge home rule problems with how we enforce our governing documents. We will see some municipal ordinances that will say, hey, if it's the streets, that's really the sole police power of the municipality. Don't touch it as an HOA. But I don't see it. I don't see a sea change in how we do things. Fair? Awesome, great question. Complicated. That gets complicated though. But generally, as long as we're not taking away a right that the municipality or the state government or the federal government provides, like satellite dishes, right? 1996 law allows people to put up satellite dishes on their property or their exclusive use area. Our covenants can't take away that right. Question, sir? Oh, no, did you? Oh, I saw
Is
something.
there a state statute that says that HOA board members can't be paid?
Is there a state statute that says HOA board members can't be paid? No. No, in fact, you can, but well, your governing documents often will say that they can't be paid, but they will be reimbursed the normal expenses incurred in accordance with their volunteer service, which to me suggests they can't be paid without an amendment to the documents. To my knowledge, the issue is getting D&O, directors and officers insurance, that will cover compensated volunteers. Most D&O policies cover non-compensated volunteers, board members, officers, committee persons. But if you're getting paid, probably not covered under a standard D&O policy. When we had manager licensing, you probably a paid director would have needed to be licensed as a manager. But now that the governor vetoed the manager licensing extension, there is no manager licensing, and you could do it. So yeah, and that may be the future because we're finding difficulties sometimes in getting people on certain boards that it's like I don't need this headache. But it gets very expensive. And when you have somebody who's getting paid who doesn't live in your community to manage it, personal opinion, we've lost a lot. Right now we're paying somebody who doesn't care about us, doesn't know that what's going on, who's not as responsive perhaps as a neighbor could be. To me, that's a worst case scenario for self-determination as a community, but it may be a thing in the future. Yes.
Can you give us your thoughts on individual conflict?
Ooh, okay, we have another hour here. So that's a good question. Well, I have a personal opinion and I have a legal opinion. So the legal opinion is that the Nonprofit Act has a conflicting interest transaction statute that says basically if a board member is making a decision that benefits them or a member of their family or an entity that they have an ownership interest in, then you're supposed to declare the conflict and so forth. But the court, if there's a lawsuit over that contract, the court won't overturn it if there was disclosure and it was ratified by the disinterested owners or the disinterested board, or the contract was fair to the association. I think that's a pretty weak statute personally. because you could, as a conflicted director, not disclose the conflict, vote in favor of your own self-interest, and then you get a judge to decide later if it's fair to the association. I don't think that's a best practice. So here's my personal opinion, which is if we as volunteers who serve our homeowners have to be at least as good, if not better, than those we are asking for compliance from, meaning we have to be clean. We have to be above reproach, and it's very difficult to get the smell of a conflicted interest transaction out of the minds of the owners. You can explain the law all you want, and all they will often hear is that board members profiteering from serving on my HOA board. I want them out. And we've seen a lot of recalls. So I don't love the idea at all, and I wouldn't recommend it. But it's legal. You can do it, and it's done all the time. Does that help?
Yes, but is there a particular class? I.e. real estate?
I don't think so. You know, realtors sometimes serve on boards because they want their name out and they want information. And, you know, we sometimes set up walls for that. But I haven't seen it personally been a huge problem. And a lot of times the realtors sometimes are the most savvy, some of the more savvy board members who we would want, because they understand that home prices, the aesthetics, the reserve fund disclosures. So there's a lot of benefits, I think, that come from having realtors on the board that to me personally outweighs the concern about any self-dealing. That would be my personal opinion. Yeah, you're welcome. In the back, sir.
Yeah, I was unclear on the matter of signs.
Oh, that's two.
Can we say zero, or say we cannot say zero?
Well, that's a great question. We can write it any way you want. Whether a judge will uphold it is a question.
It does say you can regulate the number.
Right, and zero is a number. I think it's a number, right?
We're just saying if you say zero, you're gonna be the test case in Colorado. I don't know if you wanna be the first one or not for that one.
Yeah.
I'd wait to see if someone else wants to fight that fight before you do. That's just my personal opinion.
Mine too.
It just says you can regulate the number.
Yeah, and so
I assume someone's gonna try that and say the number is zero and it's gonna, you run up the.
there's kind of a letter in the spirit issue.
Run
Run up the flagpole. Oh, that's hilarious, Leslie.
Thank you.
But, if they have the right to put up flags and we can't regulate them by content, can we get around that restriction by saying zero? I don't think a judge would uphold it right now. I would say, my personal opinion, if I was on my board, and I'm on a board but not an HOA board, I'd say 3 or 4. That's my take. I'm not telling you to do it, but I wouldn't do it 1. I wouldn't probably do it 2. I would give it some latitude until people return to sanity over this issue. Because the people that want 25, what's that?
Sanity.
Sanity. Well, the people that, and here's the irony. This is Moeller's law. The people who have the worst taste in signs and flags want the most of them. And then, so the question is that the person that I want to spend association common fund monies fighting over something that I know statute favors their display of flags and signs as long as they're not commercial? I wouldn't do it. I wait a year before I started ratcheting it down. Maybe every year you decrease the number by 1. 4 years from now, you're at 0. By then, most of the cases would have filtered up to the Supreme Court. And by then, probably the legislature would have said that was a terrible idea. They changed the law.
We already had issues with
Oh, yeah, ridiculous amount of record requests
and you're trying to follow the new policy of dropping it within 10 days.
within 10 days. Yep.
Which was really difficult because volunteers and are trusting that it's the guys find the
I agree.
record. It's really hard to follow. So you said it's retroactively. How does that work retroactively on the 11th day after the request? As long as you say we're working on it, we'll get it to estimate this amount of cost fee schedule. Are you okay with that? And then by us responding, does that give us 30 days or do we not get 30 days at all? How do we get 30 days?
So the question is, how do we calculate all these fines and timeframes? And Hammersmith has a branded slide rule for volunteers available for sale in the lobby. So the question is, how do we get these records? Some of them are off-site storage, right? You have to figure out when the manager has time to go out there because they're doing sewer line breaks and who knows what. And that 10-day window within which we have to produce the records goes very fast. And so usually what we say is, listen, homeowner, here's what we have, boom, 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 because under 209.4 of Kiowa, there's certain records that we have to have reasonably available at all times. Get them off the plate, say, here's those that we have at our disposal. Here's what we're doing to get those, and we'd ask your cooperation as we work diligently to provide them. If they want, yes, they will get a $500 penalty tacked onto, they will pursue you for that. And then we're going to be stuck with an impossibility defense, which is, Judge, we couldn't get the records in 10 days. We couldn't do it. We tried.
It's 30 days for mail by written request, but it's days for. I don't understand the way the policies written are that is copied on the page. It's certified records versus. We're just trying to get it out to them, but we don't typically have the time.
Yeah, I agree. I get it. And so I don't have a good answer for how we can shorten those timeframes because a lot of times the old records are in paper. And when managers are going to shake their heads, yes, when you import a new client from other management companies, the records are like a bomb went off in the file box, right? So trying to find those is a boondoggle. And Tim and I had these paranoid theories that the homeowners who are currently on unemployment will try to supplement their income asking for weird records and getting a $50 a day stipend for living in your community while they don't pay their assessments, just by requesting records that they know you can't deliver within 10 days. Could happen. Hasn't yet happened, but yes, we don't know how this is going to shake out. It's not a pretty situation. And with their ability, so one of the things that we talked about is, well, maybe we're just going to adopt a records destruction policy and get rid of all of it. We're just going to torch the stuff that's in paper format and say it's gone. Now, we don't ever, I'm not saying to do that. We would never do that if somebody made a request. But it begs the question, if we have 50 bankers boxes from 1972, are we doing ourselves a favor by keeping it around? Talk to your manager, have the manager talk to the lawyer, okay?
It's okay to destroy the records after a certain amount of time.
Well, I mean, what you might say is that we just don't know where they are.
Policy for record retention and destruction, but we do that just so we don't have.
Yeah, it's just impossible.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we don't destroy records, and frankly, I'd rather take the $500 hit than to get rid of the records, because when we get in front of a judge, they'd be furious if they found out we got rid of records, so I'm not suggesting. If they just happen to disappear in the night, you know, what are you gonna do? They evaporated. Yes, sir. Sorry, Jessica, you want me to go?
There are no regulations.
Why I'm putting my ear up to this thinking I can hear it.
Regulations stipulating.
Yeah, the question is, how long is there a law stipulating how long we have to keep records? Kiowa's 317 does have several categories of how long we have to keep records, and then many of the categories don't have a year or date range assigned to them. So tax records, I think it's 7 or 10 years, and current contracts or contracts for work performed within the last 2 years as an example, that says we have to keep the minutes. So to me, that means we have to keep the minutes forever. Now, we might be able to maybe adopt a records destruction policy saying, after 50, I'm making up numbers, after 15 years, the minutes really don't matter anymore. We're going to get rid of them. But yes, there's only a few date ranges in that 317 of Kiowa that give you any clarity as to how long you have to worry about this. And that's another legislative problem that we've just been unfixed since 2014.
So what happens when previous managers destroy minutes? They're gone.
You don't have, you don't have.
If you don't have them, you don't have them. If you don't have, yeah, that's the thing. We can never apologize for the sins of our forefathers, in my opinion, as association volunteer leaders. You take the issue that you have and run with it. If they're not there, they're not there. Sorry, we made a good faith effort to find them. They're not there. You don't have to say it this way. Do what you need to do. You can't produce them out of thin air. You can't make them up. See you later. Impossibility is still a valid legal defense as long as we make that argument with good faith. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your participation, the lively questions, If you have any additional questions going forward, please feel free to reach out to your manager, your regional director, to myself. We are happy to assist. Thank you all so very much for coming. It was great to see everybody and meet so many of you. And we look forward to seeing you. We're going to do this hopefully quarterly next year so that we can continue to spread the knowledge. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Budget meeting.